Welcome to LV Scary Stories. In today's video, we'll explore 4 chilling and unexplainable encounters experienced by paramedics and police officers responding to 911 calls. These true stories delve into the strange and the paranormal, shedding light on moments that defy logic. Before we begin, please be advised that some details in this video are graphic and may not be suitable for all viewers. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you enjoy spine-chilling tales like these, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's dive into the eerie world of paranormal 911 calls. Story number 1. It was a quiet night, the kind that makes you almost forget you're on duty. The radio crackled, breaking the stillness, a head-on collision on a desolate countryside road. I hit the lights and sped to the scene, preparing myself for the worst. When I arrived, the damage was catastrophic. A white car and a gray car, crumpled like tin cans. The kind of accident didn't leave survivors. I checked the white car first. The driver was slumped over the wheel, his lifeless eyes staring at nothing. There was nothing I could do for him. I turned to the gray car, my flashlight catching a horrifying scene. The woman in the driver's seat was still alive, barely. Blood was everywhere. Her right forearm was severed and shoved into her mouth, her own arm jammed in so far it seemed impossible. Her chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, her eyes blinking slowly, as though she was aware of her agony but too far gone to react. I turned to check the back seat and froze. A little girl, no older than 2, sat in her car seat. She was breathing, whimpering softly. Out of all 3, she was the only one with a real chance. I worked fast, getting the toddler out of the wreck and carrying her away from the carnage. She was so small, so fragile. She clung to me as I whispered, "You're okay now. I've got you." Backup arrived and the paramedics took the little girl to the hospital. I stayed behind, helping to secure the scene and process what I'd just witnessed. But the image of that woman, the arm, the blood, the vacant blinking, haunted me. A few nights later, I woke up to my 5-year-old son, Max, climbing into bed with me and my wife. It was 4 a.m., and he was trembling. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, my voice groggy. "I'm scared," he whispered. "Scared of what?" "The elephant lady." I frowned. "What elephant lady?" He shook his head and buried his face in my chest. I chalked it up to a bad dream, kissed his forehead, and let him stay with us. But it kept happening. Every few nights, Max would wake up terrified, muttering about the elephant lady. I asked him to tell me more, but he couldn't or wouldn't explain. One night, as I tucked him into bed, I decided to press him. "Max, who is the elephant lady?" He hesitated, his little hands clutching his blanket. "She has an arm coming out of her mouth," he said finally. The room seemed to grow colder. My stomach dropped. I knew in that moment that this wasn't just a nightmare. Max had described in chilling detail the woman from the accident. In my culture, there's a belief. Children who haven't lost all their baby teeth can see things. Spirits, ghosts, things that adults can't. I'd always dismissed it as folklore, but now I wasn't so sure. That night, I stayed in Max's room after he fell asleep. I sat in the dark, my mind racing, my pulse pounding in my ears. The house was silent, but it felt like something was watching me. I finally spoke aloud, my voice firm but quiet. "If you're looking for your daughter, she's not here. She was taken to the community hospital. You can find her there." I don't know what I expected. A gust of wind, a whisper, some sign that she'd heard me. But there was nothing. just silence. After that night, Max never mentioned the elephant lady again. He slept soundly, and life returned to normal. But for me, I still think about her. I still see her in my mind's eye, sitting in that car, her arm grotesquely jammed into her mouth. And sometimes late at night, I swear I hear faint whispers in the darkness. I can only hope she found peace, or whatever it was she was looking for. Story number 2. It was just another shift for me and Maria, or so I thought. The call came in from a nursing home. An elderly patient named Joyce was having chest pain and shortness of breath. Calls like this weren't uncommon, but they always had the potential to turn serious fast. When we arrived, Joyce was sitting upright in her bed, clutching her chest and struggling to breathe. She looked at us with a mix of fear and desperation. "My chest hurts. And my jaw too," she managed to say between shallow breaths. Maria got to work setting up the EKG while I checked her vitals. The EKG confirmed it. Cardiac arrhythmia. Her heart wasn't beating the way it should. I exchanged a quick, knowing glance with Maria. We needed to act fast. But before I could say anything, Joyce's eyes widened and she pointed toward us. Her voice came out weak but clear. "Who's the older lady with the black eye standing there with you two?" Maria and I froze, and I instinctively glanced at the nursing staff, who all looked just as bewildered as we were. There was no one else in the room. Before we could ask her what she meant, Joyce gasped and went limp. Her breathing stopped, and her pulse was gone. "She's coding!" Maria shouted. I jumped into action, starting chest compressions while Maria grabbed the IV medication. After 2 rounds of compressions and a dose of epinephrine, her pulse came back. Joyce's eyes fluttered open, and she gasped for air. Relief washed over me, but I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. We got her onto the gurney as quickly as we could and wheeled her to the ambulance. Maria took the driver's seat while I stayed in the back with Joyce. She was hooked up to oxygen and starting to stabilize, though she was still visibly shaken. As I monitored her vitals, she tugged at my sleeve. Her voice was muffled through the oxygen mask. "Who's the old lady with the black eye?" I froze. My skin prickled, and the air in the ambulance felt heavier. I glanced around, but of course there was no one else back there except me and Joyce. "Just breathe, Joyce," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Focus on your breathing." But she wouldn't let it go. "She's standing right next to you," she whispered. The moment she said it, I knew what was coming. Her eyes rolled back, and the monitor started screaming. She was coding again. "Not now, Joyce," I muttered, launching into chest compressions. The ambulance lurched as Maria pushed the siren and sped toward the hospital. We reached the ER just in time. The hospital staff swarmed around Joyce as soon as we wheeled her in, taking over compressions and administering advanced interventions. Maria and I stepped aside to let them work, both of us catching our breath. That's when a nurse approached us, asking if we had transported another patient earlier in the day, an elderly woman who had suffered a fall at home. She had a black eye. Maria and I exchanged a stunned look. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" The nurse hesitated, then said, "She passed away not long after arriving. Brain hemorrhage." I felt a chill run down my spine. Joyce had described her perfectly. The black eye, the elderly appearance. There was no way she could have known. A few days later, we found out that Joyce's condition had deteriorated. Her family had decided to put her on comfort measures, and she passed away peacefully in the hospital. I still think about that night. Was it just a coincidence? A hallucination from a struggling heart? Or was there something more? I'll never forget Joyce's words, or the eerie sense that for a brief moment we weren't alone in that room. Story number 3. I've been a police officer for over a decade, and I thought I'd seen it all, until this call came in. It was around 3 a.m. when the dispatcher radioed me about a strange situation in my patrol area. Someone had dialed 911 twice from the same number. Each time, the operator heard only a dog barking before the line abruptly went dead. The address was just 2 blocks away, so I arrived within a minute. The house looked neglected. The lawn was overgrown, and there was trash scattered near the porch. A single light above the door buzzed faintly, casting eerie shadows. The windows were dark, and the place seemed abandoned. I knocked hard on the door and called out, but there was no response. Only the sharp, high-pitched barking of a small dog from inside. That's when the smell hit me. Even from outside, it was overpowering, like rotting garbage mixed with something metallic. Another officer arrived shortly after, and we decided to force entry. The door creaked open to reveal a dim hallway. Our flashlights swept over peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture. At the end of the hall, a tiny chihuahua stood in the shadows, barking furiously. Its eyes glowed unnaturally in the flashlight beam, almost like 2 green embers. The stench grew stronger as we moved toward the bedroom. It was thick, clinging to the back of my throat and making my stomach churn. We found the source soon enough. A man in his 40s, morbidly obese, slumped against the bed. He was long dead, his skin bloated and discolored in sickly shades of black and green. His face was unrecognizable. His forehead and ears had been chewed off, and several of his fingers were gnawed to the bone. Only his jaw remained intact, framed by a patchy, blood-matted beard. The dog stood just outside the bedroom door, staring at us. Its barking had stopped, but its low growl sent shivers down my spine. I swear its eyes flicked from me to my partner, almost like it was sizing us up. The smell became too much, and we both stumbled out of the house, gagging and fighting the urge to vomit. The morgue team later removed the body, confirming that the man had likely died of a heart attack days earlier. But here's where it gets strange. There were no signs of a break-in, and no one else had been in the house. Yet someone, or something, had dialed 911 twice. The phone sat on the nightstand in the bedroom, undisturbed. The dog, the only living creature in the house, couldn't have done it. The family refused to take the Chihuahua, so it was sent to the local animal shelter. A few weeks later, I learned that the dog had been euthanized. It had attacked one of the shelter workers, biting their hands so severely they needed stitches. But the part that keeps me up at night happened a few days after the incident. I was reviewing the body cam footage, trying to make sense of the call. As the camera panned past the bedroom mirror, I froze. For a split second, there was a figure standing behind me. Not my partner, but a man. He was pale, with hollow eyes and jagged wounds where his ears should have been. I don't know what to make of it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or my mind playing games. But every time I close my eyes, I see those glowing green embers staring back at me. And I wonder if the dog was the only one watching us that night. Story number 4. When the call came in, it sounded like another welfare check, the kind I'd done 100 times before. An elderly lady called 911, worried about her grandson. She said she hadn't seen TJ come downstairs from his room on the 2nd floor in days. His door was locked, and he wasn't answering when she called for him. She sounded scared, and something about the tremor in her voice put me on edge. I arrived at the house just after sunset. It was one of those old, creaky homes that seemed to soak up the dark. The woman, frail and clutching a rosary, met me at the door. "Officer," she said, her voice trembling. "Please check on him. I've knocked and knocked, but he won't answer." "Don't worry, ma'am, I'll check it out," I reassured her, though the unease in her eyes made my gut twist. The stairs creaked under my boots as I climbed to the 2nd floor. The hallway was dim, lit by a single bulb that flickered faintly. I approached TJ's door and knocked firmly, TJ, this is Officer Monroe. Your grandmother is worried. Can you open the door? Silence. After a minute, I called down to the woman to confirm she hadn't heard from him. She hadn't. I decided to open the door myself. With a bit of effort, I unlocked it and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, a sickly sweet stench that told me what I was about to see. TJ was lying on his bed, motionless. His skin was pale, and the way his body had stiffened suggested he'd been dead for at least 3 days. A small bag of powder and a syringe on the bedside table made it clear, likely an overdose. I took a moment to steady myself and opened the window to air out the room. The cool night breeze was a small relief in the otherwise oppressive atmosphere. I turned to head back downstairs to inform the grandmother and call for backup, but as I reached for the door, it slammed shut. The sound was deafening in the stillness. I froze, my hand on the knob. When I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. At first, I thought the latch had caught, but then I felt it. Pressure. Like someone was holding the door from the other side. The air in the room grew heavier, and my chest tightened. I yanked harder on the door, adrenaline surging through me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the door gave way, and I stumbled into the hallway. I took a deep breath and tried to shake it off. Maybe I imagined the resistance. Maybe it was just the door sticking. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Backup and the paramedics arrived shortly after. I escorted them upstairs to the room, doing my best to appear calm. As we entered, I glanced toward the window. My stomach dropped. It was closed. I knew I'd opened it. While the paramedics confirmed TJ's death, I spoke to the grandmother. She looked heartbroken, but not entirely surprised. "He's been through so much," she said softly. "His wife left him, took everything. He moved in here to start fresh, but he was struggling. I just couldn't reach him." Her words weighed heavy on me as I finished the paperwork. Before leaving, I glanced back at the room one last time. The window was open again, the curtain shifting gently in the breeze. I don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was just grief playing tricks on me, but part of me wonders if TJ was trying to say something, or if something else was keeping him from moving on. That's all the stories for this video. For those who enjoy stories like mine, we have another new channel that have a mix of Southeast Asian scary ghost stories and stories that takes place right here in America. Check it out. The channel is currently called Hmong Horror Story. The link to the channel is in the description box. Thank you, and I'll see you in another video.